everyone to our latest episode of Inspired Men Talk. Inspired Men Talk is to help change the whole impression that men don't talk. And of course we do. We just need to understand what the location is and what our situation is sometimes. But today we've got two amazing guests come on from the OLLIE Foundation. And the OLLIE Foundation stands for One Life. What was it again? Can you remind me? I've got
one life lost is enough.
One life lost is enough, and that's such an amazing statement. Every time I hear it, it just makes me think about even what's happened in the news today. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand straight over and introduce the four guys from the podcast, me, Gary, and then we're going to get our guests. So I'm Gary. I'm the old man in the group. Who wants to go next to introduce themselves?
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist and mental health and wellbeing trainer. Hello, everybody.
Lovely.
I'm Ben. Again, I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist and also do teaching the new hypnotherapists now as they come online. And previously to that, I was a policeman for 18 years.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm Chris. I'm also, as you may have guessed, a solution-focused hypnotherapist. I'm also the youngest of the group, have 3 young children and run a scout group. So I keep myself busy.
So that's the people you're going to meet every episode, but we've got these amazing guests from the OLLIE Foundation. So Chris, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you are, what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Gary, and nice to meet everyone. So I'm Chris Sibley. I'm one of the original founders of the OLLIE Foundation, which was a charity founded 8 years ago by 3 parents who met at a bereavement support group, having each lost children to suicide. And 8 years ago, when we searched the local demographic in the local area for support that was available, there was very little. So we decided, after a few meetings, to start our own charity. Fast forward 8 years, we now provide a range of talks all under the umbrella of emotional wellbeing and suicide intervention and prevention, but starting with a planting the seed mini curriculum where we're teaching self-nurturing to primary school children, all the way through to a unique initiative around the safer prescribing of medication.
Yeah, that's such a brilliant perspective, which I've been doing this a long time and nobody ever talks about. So thank you. So Debbie, what's your role in the group and who are you and what do you do within OLLIE?
Well, hello everyone. Hello everyone watching. My name's Debbie Roberts. I'm the CEO at the OLLIE Foundation. My background is in emotional intelligence and my master's is emotional literacy in educational settings. So my life has always been very guided toward goal setting and solution focused kind of interventions and well-being. But the flip of that, of course, is where I am now, which is suicide prevention. But I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of, joining with Chris and the rest of the team to be up here where people need us, but also, as Chris mentioned, that self-nurturing and all the things we do in between to make sure that people don't ever get to actually need to see people like Peter, Chris and Ben, if at all possible.
Absolutely. We would love to be put out of work.
But that's what we say to do.
Yeah.
That's what we
Currently, we're really, really busy, which is lovely, but unfortunate in the same measure, So it's interesting. So I don't know. It's the first time we've had 2 guests on, so I don't know how to handle this. So first of all, guys, do you have any specific questions for these amazing guests? As always, I've got loads of questions, but I get accused of hogging the microphone the whole time. So we're going to hand that over to the other guys. Do you have any lovely questions?
So I think, firstly, thank you very much for your introductions and thank you for sharing a little bit with us. My question, if I may start with you, Chris, is obviously you went through a really difficult issue. How did you change that? How did you change your perspective to make it something that you wanted to help others from going through that? What happened there?
It's a great question, Peter, because a lot of people ask me when they meet me, how do you do it? And I honestly have to say, I have no idea, actually. All we knew after I'd met the other founders was we had to do something to make a difference. But now fast forward, but being involved in the work all the time, people ask me all the time, how do you do it? How do you separate that? And I honestly don't know. I'm just glad that I can. Now, again, full disclosure, I've got combined ADHD, so I often wonder if it's because of my ADHD I'm able to separate it in my mind, because I talk about my lived experience often, and I'm quite comfortable doing that. But how I do that, Peter, I honestly can't tell you.
No problem. And then, Debbie, if I may, what are some of the projects that you're working on? Because we've spoken previously, and you mentioned a couple of the projects. What's a project that you're working on right now with the OLLIE Foundation that you'd like everybody to know about?
Oh, thank you for that question. So something that we've been working on actually for quite a while, but it really is taking all our attention, is helping people to feel confident to talk about the side effects of medication. Because there are over 100 medications that have side effects that include anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. And if you crunch the numbers, and if you're really serious as a government, as a public health team, as a community, if you're serious about reducing suicide, you have to look at this. You just have to. Because even the manufacturers themselves tell us that 1 in 200 people will struggle with overwhelming thoughts. And we also know, and I think maybe if some of your community listening in are health professionals, they'll know that often, for instance, antidepressants will maybe lift your motivation before they improve your sense of well-being. So before you were too tired to get a glass of water, let alone end your life.
Yeah.
But now you actually have the energy and the motivation to do both.
It's an interesting fact that, sorry to interrupt you, that not a lot of people, we all see people who come to see us, and they probably 50% of the time, probably much more than that, they're on antidepressants to help them with their mood. And very few of them realize it's the antidepressants, the benefit of the antidepressants in a way, which is taking them to a place where they can actually carry that out before they get to a place where they don't need to. But you mentioned over 100 medications, and I don't think most people, even the people in the know that the impact of other medications. So that for me is such a different slant on where you're taking on the whole medical industry. You know, that medical model is so sold on issuing medication because of the long-term benefit. They don't actually take that side effect very much into account.
I think so we can unpeel this onion many, many times over.
Yes.
You know, most health professionals have no really deep and meaningful suicide intervention and prevention training.
No.
One of the things we do at OLLIE, not only do we deliver that, but there are plenty of people that deliver good stuff in that area. But what we try and do also is offer training and awareness talks that look at the nature of suicide. Why is it that 50%-ish of people would never meet the criteria for a mental illness, but have just come out of A&E and are now sitting in your office because they're feeling suicidal? What is it all about? We have
DSM-5 says so. Because the DSM-5 says so.
Yes, I've actually taken the liberty of rewriting the DSM from a woman's point of view.
All right.
And it's supposed to be funny, but actually, when I reread it, I just thought this is just depressing.
Yes. Unfortunately, because that's that medical model written by people who probably aren't in that space.
Yeah, and you know, Gary, one of the talks that we deliver, and we actually really enjoy this talk because it really opens people's eyes up. We work with a historian from Cambridge University, and we look at the history of suicide. And the reason we started doing this was we wondered if there was a sort of emotional epigenetic line. Why is it that we are still so fearful to talk about this, to say the word, like we are with Harry Potter's Voldemort? You know, if we say the word, we'll, you know, somehow give it energy. And we looked at this and we found two really interesting things. There was a point during our history in England and in other countries too, where somebody's suiciding, and we'll come to this point a bit later on, but for most of time, it's been a constant stat that 3 out of 4 suicides are male. I should just say the other half of that sentence is that 3 out of 4 attempts are female, but that's been pretty constant, both of those figures throughout time. But what happened during the Middle Ages and going through to the 18th century was that the church moved away from this sort of thought of martyrdom and really focused in on this being a mortal sin. And so the punishment was quite severe, and people had their possessions removed, including their homes.
Mm.
Now, turns out that wasn't a very good deterrent.
No.
It wasn't stopping people from ending their lives. There were, during those 100 years, lots of accidents that happened because, you know, otherwise you're going to make a lot of people homeless. But there came a point around the Civil War where people had had enough, and the coroners, who had always had the option to give a verdict of non compos mentis or felo de se. So felo de se, self-murder, non compos mentis, meaning you're not of sound mind. But up until that point, it was always felo de se. But the result of that was that the monarchy would take all your belongings. This was creating an economic burden for the parish councils. If we had public health teams then, this would be, you know, the thing they'd be focusing on. So you can almost see overnight coroners changing their reporting from felo de se to non compos mentis. And the reason was because if you were given that as a verdict, your property was not removed. And we weren't creating generational poverty, because it was predominantly women and children that were then suffering.
Yes.
And actually, we still see this now, where mortgages can't be paid, people have to move away. There are all sorts of parallels today. But we use that to help people to try and understand where we might have inherited this fear and this shame of talking about suicide, because on an epigenetic level, we've really learned that this is not something you talk about publicly.
And it's not, and we know how many road deaths are there each year. That's well reported and talked about. But there's much bigger suicide and suicide attempts. But that gets swept on. It's not newsworthy. So whether that's because people are stigmatized by it or just because it's not going to sell newspapers, I don't know. But there's something else. Is there any other questions, guys?
No, I think it's interesting what you're saying, you know, about the law and the church. I think the church has had a long influence in laws in this country for a long time. And, you know, it was a criminal offence to attempt to commit suicide. It was deemed as self-murder or an attempted self-murder. Then that started back in the mid-13th century. And, you know, if we actually look at the time frame of when that stopped, it wasn't all that long ago that law was repealed, which is crazy to think that was the case. I think my question is, if I'm a parent or if I'm one of these young people who are struggling at the minute and I've been to see my doctor, I've maybe been given antidepressants and I'm just struggling to tick over day to day, what is it that the OLLIE Foundation can bring to me or offer me, and how do I go about accessing that?
So if we're talking about medication, and if we just stick with that for a moment, we have a prescription safe plan, which is freely downloadable from our website, and from September available in 16 languages, 16 of the most commonly spoken languages. And there will be videos also in British Sign Language. Wow. Anyway, that aside, the prescription safe plan is just an extra layer of security for the parent, the young person, and the prescriber, quite honestly, that just allows the conversation to happen, and that it explains all medication has side effects. And this medication that you're on is no different. But this medication has something which other medications have too, something called a paradoxal side effect, which means it can, in some people, cause the thing it's trying to prevent. Mm-hmm. Now, though this is really unlikely, we need you to be aware of it. And basically, Ben, what we're trying to do with everyone is have people get to the point where they feel comfortable to really have these conversations, just as they would with antibiotics. We're not afraid to say you might feel a bit nauseous, just like you might with an antidepressant, but we probably can power through and get to the good bit where you start to enjoy the benefits. But you might feel worse because this is a drug that impacts your mood, and it could impact your mood in a way that we're not expecting. And we want you not to be at home thinking, I'm such a loser that even this medication isn't touching the sides of this. We want you to come back and know that it's Not necessarily, but it's potentially the medication, and we can do something about that.
Yeah.
So that is a conversation we have for everybody. You asked about what else is available. We have also, well, all our training, by the way, and all our awareness talks, we offer them for free. They're online. They tend to be in the evening. You can make a donation to be in the room. Thank you to everyone that does, because we can't exist without donations. But it's really our currency is people trained. Our currency is people that feel more confident to keep themselves and others safe. That's what matters to Chris and Jane and Stuart, the other parents who set up the foundation. Other things that we do, we offer an online mindful art class every 2 weeks. You need no skill. You only need a scrap of paper and a pencil. So it's really cheap. You do need Wi-Fi. It is online. In person, we have a community garden. You can come out and hang with us and have coffee and croissants. And if you want, you can get your hands into the soil and get all those good microbes.
Where are you based?
Well, we work internationally. We work across the country, but physically our garden is in St Albans in Hertfordshire.
I was asking for Christopher because he's a gardener.
Well, we actually now have 2 herbalists working with us, so we will now be able to support people not only to understand how to sustain themselves with food, but how they can use herbs to support themselves as well. So yeah, as Chris said when we started, so we try and span the arc. And before anyone asked, yes, our focus is all over the place. We know that. Chris and I and the others have sat down and really explored this, because if you just focus on one thing, there is an argument, that might be better. But we love having a garden. We love having online art classes. And yeah, I'm going to hand over to Chris. What else do we love?
Well, I've got a question for Chris. So we had recently another chat from a charity on Tough Enough to Care, deals with suicide and PTSD, things like that, mostly for ex-service people. And one of the things he said is that charities are really struggling now. Most small charities are tending to fold because funding's really difficult. But the question I've got, which might roll into that, is, what's been the biggest challenge you faced from when you first set up and decided to go, well, we're going to have a charity, we're going to help people, we don't want this to happen to anyone else, and all of the different motivations you had. What challenges did that bring for you?
But putting the funding aside, because you're right, it's particularly challenging at the moment. With austerity, people have got less money, there's a lot more pressure, and there's a lot more need for the resources provided by the charity sector. And in my day-to-day, I travel all around the county meeting other charities and various organisations, and it's the same across the piece. So, but putting that aside, because that definitely is a challenge, I'd actually say it's raising awareness. Because again, in my day-to-day, I meet other incredible charities doing incredible stuff, whether it's supporting homeless families or whatever it might be. And I've never heard of them. And they're in the same county that I'm in. And every week I'm meeting more and more charities where the support is there, if only they can get the word into the community that they actually exist. So I'd actually say that's one of the biggest challenges, because you think people would just learn organically, but they actually only tend to learn when they need a service. Because that's when they start looking for the service, and then they find it either doesn't exist or it does exist. But until that point, we're a little bit under the radar, because if you don't need the services, you're not looking for us. So a lot of what we do is all about raising awareness. Because to touch on a point that Debbie made, when we started the charity, and I really remember it clearly, we sat there talking about what we were going to do. And we said, whatever we do, if it saves one life and stops one family going through it, then that's been worth it. Well, now we're 8 years on, and we've helped a lot more people than we initially thought we could. But yeah, awareness is the thing, which is part of the reason I spend my kind of life traveling around meeting anybody anywhere. As Debbie might say sometimes, I'll go to the opening of a crisp packet.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that.
That's fantastic. I think the things you're both talking about, you're very passionate about this, clearly. You've already kind of touched on this, Chris, but I just wanted to ask, you said that you met the other founders when you were at a bereavement support group.
Yeah.
So when you went to that group, what did you do when you was in that room with those people? What did you feel was missing there that made you want to make something better, if that makes sense?
Okay, so the group itself is run by volunteers. It's called SOBS. and it's survivors of bereavement through suicide, and they have groups around the UK run by volunteers. Now, I didn't go to a SOBS meeting for 6 months after my son's death, and as it happened, my first meeting was on the same day as my son's inquest. Now, for those 6 months, I didn't feel as if I needed to see anybody. You're kind of in your own world. But for some reason, I just felt like I wanted to go somewhere where I knew everybody in the room had had a similar experience. They'd all been bereaved by suicide in one way, shape, or form. But I had a conversation with the guy who facilitated the group before the meeting, and he actually gave me a bit of interesting information, which to me didn't make any difference, and I'll explain what I mean. But he said to me, I know you're going to the inquest on the day of your first SOBS meeting. He said, don't be surprised if you don't get a verdict of suicide. Now, to me, it didn't matter what the verdict was because the end result was still exactly the same. But to lots of people, that matters incredibly. Now, because of the way my son died, I just thought, well, he's definitely going to get a verdict of suicide. Now, so I went to the coroner's inquest and didn't get a verdict of suicide. It was put down as accidental death for a couple of really strange reasons. Now, again, didn't impact me, but I was glad I was pre-warned because it might have been more of a shock. I then went to the SOBS group, and it was the first time in 6 months. You know, you sit in a circle. It's like the thing you'd see on the TV, and you can talk if you want or not if you don't want to. But I realised that the thoughts I'd been having, the way I'd been feeling, you know, this anger when I was on my own, I'd have these outbursts of incredible anger when I was on my own indoors. Being in this group, I realised actually other people are feeling the same thing, and I suddenly realised the people in this room got it. Whereas nobody else to that point actually got it. And that's where my headspace was. There's no point me telling anyone because they won't understand. And then as soon as I got to the SOBS group, it was actually they do understand. And then you only meet once a month. So after a few meetings, Stuart kind of migrated towards me because Stuart sadly had to join the group after myself when he lost his son. And our personal circumstance was very similar. I lived on my own, but had my children on contact regularly. Stuart lived on his own, had his children on contact. The children lived with the mothers in both situations. So Stuart kind of migrated towards me as a like-minded soul, if you like. We both then met Jane because she actually helped facilitate the group. So we then met. And for me personally, I saw a lot of people in the group. This isn't a criticism, but you'll know what I mean. They were stuck. And I mean really stuck. It was Groundhog Day. Every time I saw them, I knew exactly what they were going to tell me because they were literally stuck in this loop. And for me, I didn't want to be that person. Okay, now my son was a truly kind-hearted individual, and a lot of things came out afterwards from his friends that showed just the kind of person he was. So I think part of it was, well, it's what my son would have done. Okay, that was part of my motivation. TJ was all about helping people, even though he was only a young man. So that was part of my motivation. Stuart was similar. He just said, I can't go on trying to live my life as it was before. I have to do something. And Jane was very similar. And to be honest, Chris, at the start, we didn't know what we were going to do. We just knew we wanted to make a difference, but we had no idea what that was. And we looked at all sorts of different things. And in the end, thought, right, the best way to make a real difference to the community locally is to start a charity. So that was it. Yeah, that was
it. Absolutely. I mean, you said a really good point there, and we see this a lot in our field of solution-focused therapy, of people seeming to get stuck in that rhythm of where they are. They get stuck and like you said, it's like Groundhog Day. It's the same every time. What we do with solution-focused therapy is very good at looking at the small steps you can do to change that. What do you do in your group to try and break those cycles when you're meeting? I mean, and this could be a question for Debbie as well. What do you do as the OLLIE Foundation to help people who are stuck in those little loops?
Chris, shall I let you respond first?
You go, Debbie. You go. I'm just pondering the question. That's a good question, but I've never thought of it like that, actually. So I'm just pondering.
So at OLLIE, well, prior to joining OLLIE, I was already somebody that worked with a business tool called the theory of constraints. It's very well known, it's very well understood, and it's used by huge organizations. And I'm very conscious that we are a collection of cells and microbes, and we are the definition of an organization. So I joined a charity that was called, I actually work as a volunteer director for another charity, TOC for Education. And that's all about showing people how to resolve conflict, internal and external, and a wonderful method for goal setting. So we use that process in OLLIE. And what we do is we teach people that process. And it's not SMART, by the way, it's something very different. But we teach people the science of goal setting and then how to use this particular methodology. And interestingly, Chris, and not just interesting, I think it's pivotal. There was an occasion, and I'm sure you may have experienced a similar thing, where somebody contacted us and said this young woman was going to kill herself that day. She'd seen everyone. She'd seen her GP. She'd seen the rapid assessment team. Everyone had seen her that was ever going to see her. And she was going to be referred for emergency counselling, but she was sitting at home in that moment still wanting to kill herself. And this family reached out to OLLIE in absolute desperation and said, look, we know you do the goal setting, we know you do conflict resolution. You literally can't make the situation any worse. Could you meet? And, you know, I absolutely knew if this woman said she would meet with us, then I was halfway there, because she didn't want to die. She just didn't know how to continue living. And that isn't the same thing. So the goal setting process that we use is very much solution focused. I bet it very much mirrors all the sorts of things that you're doing. And in that moment, I was still actually working at that point. I was CEO here part-time, but I had the role of mental health wellbeing lead for a local county council. And I actually knew I could lose my job at that point, because this went against every safeguarding that you have at a county council level. Yeah. But 2 days earlier, my best friends had lost their son to suicide. And I mean, even when I say it, I feel sick. The nausea that I felt, not just because of what had happened, but because I knew what they were going to go through. I knew Chris and Jane and Stuart, and I knew that this pain that they were in today, just level one. It was that drove me to say, yeah, sure, I'll meet her, because I just felt we're not losing another person to suicide.
Yeah.
It's actually the first time we used these tools. And what happened was they were not only successful, she stayed out of suicidal ideation. And you'll all know that suicide can be a bit like a wave. It comes back crashing over and knocking you off your feet again and again and again in some people. So it was a situation that led us to consider this is really effective as an intervention. And we've been using it ever since.
It's fantastic.
Now, Chris, I should also say for your listeners, we don't offer a crisis line. We don't offer counselling. We're not clinicians. Mm-hmm. I have maybe more of an academic background. Mm-hmm. And that's what is such a beautiful mesh of things. We have the lived experience and the professional experience, and together we look at what gaps exist and how we can fill them. But we don't.
Yeah, and you know, there is such a gap for that, you know, and it is that initial support you're giving to people that's so crucial in those times, and then signposting them on to something else later on, you know. But it's that initial moment where you guys are working, which is really, really important. It sounds like, you know, you've got this worked out to a really good, like you said, academic based, science based point of view, which is really important. And I think that's fantastic. I don't want to hog, so if anybody else got any other questions.
Debbie, I just want to follow up on that point. You're not a crisis line, you're not that sort of trained counsellors or etc. So just to add on to that, who exactly do you work with? Is it just children? Is it adults? You know, everybody? How do people know whether it's right for them or not?
So, you know, when I think it's fair to say, Chris, that when we first came into existence, it was very much focused on young people and supporting those who support young people. So we were training teachers and parents and in some cases students themselves. But there really isn't, you can't, you know, what's good for that group is not so nuanced that it can't be used anywhere else. So today we actually work with everybody, and we spend most of our time supporting the supporters, whether those are parents and friends or professionals. So we're commissioned by CAMS, we're commissioned by public health teams, we We now train the pharmacists each year studying pharmacy at Manchester University. So we're at sort of both ends, and we will not just crisp packets, we will go anywhere and share our thoughts and our version of the world with anyone who would like to hear from us and learn from us. And we tell everyone, Ben, go to as much training as you can. We're giving you, you know, our lens, but go to as much as you can, because there's as Chris said, there's loads of free stuff out there, but you don't necessarily know it.
Yeah.
So on our sessions, we signpost to everyone.
I'm thinking in my mind, you know, I'm thinking of partners who are in the police, and that's another area of suicide alone. But it's often when maybe perhaps they lose their jobs or something doesn't go to plan, and they are left in that ether, in that sort of void of not knowing where to go, who can they talk to, and equally their partners struggle with how to deal with their loved one who's going through this turmoil and nightmare, which impacts the family and everything else, and often results in the breakdown of the family to the point of separation, and adds another layer of crisis. So it's great to hear that you encompass everybody in what you do.
Yeah, we do. And we love working with all first responders. That there is such a huge need there. There is such a huge level of anxiety on a day-to-day level, whether it's just, you know, the anxiety that gets you out the door and that cortisol high, but it takes a toll on your body. And like you say, when for whatever reason you're stepped down or you leave the profession for whatever reason, there is a void that can be very challenging. So yeah, we work with absolutely every organisation that we're invited to work with.
Amazing.
And on that, Ben, just to follow up, that also includes other charities.
Yeah.
So you know, we work with other charities as well, because it's all about helping people. Okay, so, and if we can help people, then we'll do it in any way that we possibly can, because that's what it's all about, you know, just helping people. So yeah, we will literally work with anybody.
Fantastic.
So Chris, that whole I'll work with anyone, anywhere, anytime, which is amazing. It's also a really broad brush. So to get, you know, most charities pinpoint a specific group of target group so they can actually get their messaging out. How challenging is it? You've said getting that message out is difficult, but trying to get the message out for everyone all of the time in any situation, both pharmacists to people who are in a real pickle, how do you do that?
Well, it's a really great question, Gary, because when people say, can you just summarize what you do, it turns into a 3-page email, right? With loads of links and attachments. So what I tend to start off by saying is everything we do is to change and save lives.
Yes.
And this is how we do it. And then I go into the detail around what we do, because fundamentally everything we do is to change and save lives. So that's how I nutshell it, and then go on to discuss the other differences around it. Because using prescription safe plan as a great example, we talk about antidepressants, and some people may or may not know that the known side effect is they can give you suicidal thoughts. But what was eye-opening to me was I knew about antidepressants. What I didn't know about was that some asthma medication can do that. Some acne medication can do that. And even more tellingly in today's society, and with the fact that I told you I've got ADHD, a large majority of ADHD medications also have that known side effect.
Yeah.
And we all know people who are likely to be on one of those medications, or a friend of the family will be, and invariably they have no idea that's a known side effect. Now, it doesn't mean you wouldn't stop taking the medication. That's not the point. It's not an anti-medication thing. It's to keep people safe while they're on it, but also the dispenser for moral injury. Because how do you feel as the dispenser if you prescribe something to someone and within a week they've taken their own life or attempted to? Mm-hmm. So there's so many facets to it all, and it does.
Sorry. I was just thinking that list of things that you've just mentioned. I know that's a very small amount of the medications that you're aware of, but all of those things, to me, that screams out that's what young people would be using as well. You know, asthma medication, ADHD medication, acne medication. That just screams teenage or young person to me. And as a father, that's terrifying. You know, because their brains are hardly developed as it is. Adding that into the mix, I can see how that could be a problem. I know this isn't an anti-medication bandwagon, but if they knew that that was a side effect, they would understand why they felt like that, and then you can cope with that. I guess that's the message you're trying to get out.
Absolutely, 100%. And can I just say that, for crisis line call handlers, how different is the conversation? Let's imagine, Chris, that a child rings up a crisis line in crisis, and they've got a backstory that is heartbreaking. And we're focusing on that. When we don't upfront ask, have you started a medication recently? We are missing such an important thing, because we can't fix the fact that their parents are divorced or they got raped or whatever. We can't fix that in the moment. We can hold the space for them.
Yeah.
But something we can fix is their knowledge around their medication, and just suggesting to them, look, it may not be, but what you're feeling right now could be a consequence of the medication. Why don't we get you back to your GP tomorrow? See if you can get an appointment, and let's do a review of your medication.
I have to say that that's one of the most common things with my clients that I see. They have not been made aware of their side effects.
Yes.
And you ask them about their medication, they say, but I've been on it a week and I'm going to stop because I feel worse. Well, did your doctor explain that to you? No. Okay, let's have that conversation. You need to understand that.
But Ben,
to me, in my ears, that's fantastic.
But Ben, that's when they tell you they're on a mental health medication, you might say. And before we started the podcast, Debbie was very clear in saying this is not a mental health challenge. It's a challenge more than that, because if somebody came into your practice and said, oh, I'm taking some acne medication, you wouldn't go, well, what's the side effects of that?
I personally have got that advantage of being in the clinical background as well.
Yes.
So I know about the medications on a fairly broad scale, but for anyone else practicing normally who doesn't have the opportunity to have that exposure to the clinical side, you wouldn't have a clue. No.
And that's what training is about, Gary. That's what we're trying to do, is educate counsellors, doctors. Let me tell you, I was recently training a group of 26 GPs. And, obviously they brought me in because they were very interested to know about this. They were a little bit resistant, and they said, oh, you know what, we follow guidelines exactly. We called the patient back in 2 weeks later. And I just thought, well, you've told me everything I need to know, because I now know you don't know the term. And when I said to them, have you heard of akathisia? No. Now, these aren't bad people doing a rubbish job. These are great people, highly educated and skilled, doing the best job under difficult circumstances. But for whatever reason, this vital information has either been overlooked or not deemed really important. And that's what we're trying to help both the prescribers and the patient, as Chris said, to lessen the burden of moral injury and keep those patients safe. Because your patients will have a great backstory that you will focus on, but if you miss that they started Roaccutane 2 weeks ago and now they're suicidal,
that's huge. I've got a question for Chris, and then we're going to wind up, because already we've been on there. We could be on this podcast for hours. I think it's so good from a knowledge point of view. So Chris, and I know you said you got ADHD, but just what we've been talking about in the last 5 minutes about medication is enough to focus on. If you focus on nothing else, you'd be overwhelmed with the amount of work. So how are you doing all of these different things? ADHD and a good team might help, but that's a lot for one, quite a small charity in the world of charities to put out there. How are you doing that?
It's a good question. Funnily enough, I was only diagnosed with ADHD last year.
Oh, me too. So that's it's got to go with the hairstyle.
Exactly, just Now, I didn't do that because I was worried about anything. It was actually because my wife said, do you think you might have ADHD? Would you get tested? And of course I would. So all it did to me was explain previous behaviours from school reports, why I was good in my professional career, because it was all about structure and organisation and writing lists. It was project management. Now, I was very good at that, but I didn't understand why. I always felt I had to do things in a certain way. Now, knowing what I know now, it turns out in my profession, that was a bit of a superpower. The downside to it is, as you'll know, with ADHD, you can tend to have 30 plates spinning at once, and you're determined to keep all 30 plates spinning. That can be exhausting. So I do have to manage that. But it all comes back down to that thing I said earlier. It's all about helping people. So every time I go out, and I do have to mind my own mental health, because once people realise my lived story and what we do at the charity, people will then talk to me about things that they 10 minutes before would not have spoken to me about. So I hear lots of their personal stories. But the fact I know I'm helping people is what gives me my motivation, because I know it's making a difference to people. And as another example, and we'd all have loads, at an event a few weeks ago, talking about lived experience, afterwards, a chap came up to me who worked in the city, a young guy, and was worried about his medication, how he was feeling because he'd started a new medication and he didn't know about the possible side effects. Since then, I've spoken to him also about his partner, because she's suffering exactly the same thing. Both of them have now been back, I found out on Saturday, to their doctors, had a med review, and they've changed their meds. Now, I didn't know that was going to help this guy, and then it's helped his girlfriend, and he's now probably told other people. So that one conversation has probably helped 10 people, you know, including their family. And that's what gives me the drive and the motivation, because it's all about helping people. And I know that sounds like I'm a bit of a walking cliche.
Your why. It's your why.
That's my why.
All motivation comes from that, all motivation. So I just wondered. So to finish the podcast, we normally ask the guys what stuck out for them from this little chat, and then ask you guys what's the next thing you would like to happen, or the biggest tip you can give for anybody, not necessarily using you guys, but just anybody who's feeling like that guy you spoke to at the talk, anybody who's just not in their best place, what tip you give? So I'm just going to go to Peter and ask him, from everything we've just talked about, what stuck out for you?
I think from my side, it's knowing that the range of medications that can cause this problem, that's huge, because I would never have picked up on things like asthma medication or acne medication, because that's something that young people do come and see us about. So yeah, that's really been an eye-opener for me, and thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Chris, what stuck out for you?
I mean, I think I made it clear when I was about that list of medications similar to Peter, you know, but it's what stuck out for me is that is somebody who's campaigning to get this awareness out there. You know, I mean, we could all sit there and say GPs need to do more, but they are under such strain. You know, they all are. They are doing the best with what they got. So I think it comes down to the smaller people, the charities, the private healthcare, to get these messages out there. You know, I think it's a fantastic thing that you're doing, and that's something that really stuck out for me. And that, you know, there needs to be more of it, I think.
Fantastic. Ben, what jumped out for you?
For me, it's the work that you actually do overall. You know, I think of the number of families I've been to that have unfortunately in that moment and that crisis have lost their child in one way or another. And I've seen too many children, unfortunately, leave this world in various circumstances from the job that I do. But the biggest thing that always pulls at your heart is the family and the aftermath. And you think, how do they even survive that? How do they even get over it and deal with it? And to know that you guys are there, for me, I think my brain runs around a lot here thinking the places that it could be used and utilized by the frontline blue light services as a way of providing some support package to those families. So knowing that you're there, you'll definitely be at the top of my list for people that I come across in the future as the place to go, because I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. I think one of the things, all of those things stuck out, but that knowledge of the depth of where suicides come from, the migration of different, or the evolving of it, and how it's been closed down so much, and changing that stigma is so important, because ultimately, if we can change the stigma, we can open the door for more people listening and taking action. So the depths you've gone into to understand the problem and the causality of the problem and how deep it is just amazing. Finally, though, you two guys, give me some tips for anybody who might be listening, who might go, yeah, that's me. I need some support, need some help. Where can they go? What can they do? What should they just do? Where can they take action?
Whenever I'm with groups, I say one really simple thing, and it's partly because of my lived experience as well. I often say, don't be like me, don't be oblivious. because there's knowledge I've learned since my son died that if I'd known it beforehand, it might have actually made a difference, but I didn't know. So I just stress that anybody I meet, OLLIE Foundation training, other training like Debbie alluded to, go and get the training. It's free. Better to have it and never need it than not have it and wish you had.
It's about it's like learning first aid training, even if you never,
exactly,
hopefully you never use it.
Exactly that. So that's my biggest thing that I try and push on to people is just get the training, you know, because you never know.
Debbie, do you have anything you could say?
Well, I'm trying to think of what would be the most useful, and I'm thinking now of people that have been maybe bereaved or who work in the space where they're constantly spotting this, trying to look for the signs. And Chris and I get asked all the time, can you come and talk to us to help us spot the signs? And what I would like people to consider is that there aren't always signs to spot. If you're the nearest or dearest, if you're the best bud at work, you might think, and you might feel others might think that you should have seen something. But the truth is, because of that, you might have been the last to know, because what signs there were hidden from you.
Yes.
Anyone listening today is living with that burden, that guilt that they should have seen something. Please know that you didn't see something because it wasn't shown to you. But you could be a stranger in the pub, on a bridge, on a train, and receive that invitation to be a bit more curious. What's going on here? This doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, check, see.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask people how they're doing. We've all heard those stories that just somebody stopping and say, oh, what's the time? Could stop that person in their thoughts. So I hope that makes sense to your listeners.
It does. And to finish up, Debbie, I've Debbie or Chris, but I think Debbie, as you're on there now, can you tell people who are listening how to get hold of you, where to find OLLIE?
Thank you for that question. www.theolliefoundation.org. Do check out our website. Lots of free resources, including the prescription safe plan, which you can download. Lots of other free resources there. You can see all our training. And as I said, those open sessions are free access to everyone. So, and there's lots of information there that hopefully you'll find useful. And for anyone that wants to reach out to Chris or myself, our addresses are our names at theolliefoundation.org.
Okay. Are you on social media?
Oh my gosh, yes. So again, it's the OLLIE Foundation. We are most prolific on Instagram and Facebook. Chris and I are both on LinkedIn, and those are the platforms that we use most regularly. We also have a YouTube channel, and on that channel you're going to find some amazing talks around relink with Paul Sunderland and Gabor Mate, and a whole range of issues, from domestic abuse to our cultural histories and how they impact our well-being. Loads there, useful for so many people to hear. So please check it out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in. And I've been doing this a long time, and it's the first time anybody's talked to me about the implications of standard medication. I know a lot about antidepressants and anti-anxiety and the unfortunate side effects of that sometimes, not about the standard medication. So thank you so much, because you've made me a better therapist listening to that. So guys, anything you guys got to say?
Just a good thank you as well. You know, that's it's been a fantastic podcast as always, but you know, you've given us some insight to something that is clearly being overlooked. So thank you ever so much.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you very much for sharing your stories and being open with us and being honest with us, and for educating us. So thank you. It's been a great hour.
No, thank you very much. It's been amazing. I'm already looking at your website and looking at some of those training pieces that are available. So I definitely like to maybe be involved in something a bit more in the future. Certainly. So I really love what you do.
Definitely.
Thank you all. That's great. Thanks for having us, Gary, and everybody else.